there are three things I want to accomplish. Number one, I want to give you a really overview of nonprofit. Every time you say, well, I want to be a nonprofit, and I really need you to understand that there's so many kind of nonprofit, but which one fits you? And if you have a rough understanding of the structure and you'll make a sound decision, then we want to tell you how to apply for nonprofit. Then we tell you, that's number two. Number three, we want to tell you what kind of obligation you have after you have your nonprofit. So let's go. We just have a 30 minutes. And first I want to show you is a publication from IRS. So nothing new. And this is the organization reference chart. What happened is the IRS actually have all these IRS code. 501c, just a tax code in that section. So that is about nonprofit. And every time when you have, let's say if you have someone ask for donation from you, and you ask what is your what kind of nonprofit you are, nonprofit you are, and they may be saying something like, oh, we are 501c6. So you heard of people saying C3, C6, and 578, right? So this gives you the whole list of the code. See, 501c3. This is the most regular one. It's religious, educational, charitable, scientific. All of these general idea of nonprofit sits on 501c3. So if you look at the last column, it says contribution allowable. What does that mean? It means whether you can deduct that money as a nonprofit donation. So you see how they have no, how they have yes, but 501c3 is a yes. So this is a useful chart, and it's very, I just gone to irs.gov, and I know, because I know this chart is actually 557, so I pull it up. But if you just type in, you go to IRS website, you type in a nonprofit organization chart, it will give you this chart. So this is one thing I want to introduce you to. Then the other one I want to share with you is the screen I have here. And look at this. This is IRS reference chart for tax exempt organization. And on here, you can see that the code section is 501c3 is right here, right? So this is the one we just looked at it. And look at there are three main ones are out there for 501c3. So you could be any of these three, you are still 501c3. But you can also be a 501c6 is right here. Look at how many can they become. So, if you just read it, it says 501c6, professional business organizations, then 501c3 is charitable. And this 501c6, a lot of times, and in our daily life, and I would think of the commerce, the trade organization. For example, Society of CPA, they could organize under 501c6. And if you are 501c6, a donation is not the case, but the membership would be the case. So you can deduct the membership out of your expense, but it would not be called donation, right? Only when you donate to 501c3, then you might ask, what kind of organization are in 501c3? That is a great question. So I want to lead you to some little more details here. And let's just get going with my PowerPoint at this point. So 501c is the code, is the IRS code. And under here, there are 29 categories for the organization to be fall under 501c. 501c is tax exempt. Tax exempt means the federal income tax is exempted, but doesn't mean payroll taxes, doesn't mean any other taxes, state taxes or sales tax. Those are not in the category. This is just federal income tax. Okay. Now, let's see. with that, this is the chart again I was showing you earlier, and we will come back to this chart, but I want to go through the first one with you. And this is the 501c3 category. If I go back to that chart, I'm looking at this big box right here, this big one. Okay, so that big box, and we have public charities as one type and private foundations as another type. And let's go through the public charities. Remember, there are two big types, right? Public charities and also the private foundation. Public charities, and the easy one would be the church, the university, the school, the nonprofit hospitals, and the medical research institutions. So these are just an example we give you. And now, let's also look at what these are really very standard public charities. Then we also have that public charities supported through donations, and this is the one that we have Red Cross and the YMCA. So they are also 501c3. Okay, and now you go on to look at public charity under public charity, and these are also working as a public charity. Is museum, opera that charges admission, so the ticket. So they have a little bit of operation going on, but they are like nonprofit. So, and you can imagine that when you buy the ticket, you bought a ticket, that is your expense, right? But for these nonprofit, that's part of their income. And then you also have this 509A3, that's the third box, is under that 501c3. This would be like the foundation arm of a university and foundation arm of a hospital. So let me now show you how that exactly become. So we look at the public charity right here. We were move my mouse here. This is the public charity right here. This is university, and the schools are over here. And then, and you see this is a public charity, and it has earned the revenue in here. So this is where the museum and the entities that they are charity, but they charge admission fee. And right here, these are more like foundations. For example, University of Iowa Foundation. So I also have a couple of examples right here I want to show you. 501c3, like IES is a 501c3 that belongs to the public charities. It's very ordinary, regular nonprofit, and the donation comes in, and even the ticket, the registration ticket, the IES charges, that is actually part of the donation. It is a donation nature. And then you also have YMCA. This is the YMCA. It's kind of a 501c3 as well. University of Iowa, and this is a museum, the Stanley Museum of Art, that's in Iowa City. And this is, again, a nonprofit, 501c3. It's sitting under that big category. University of Iowa Foundation, the same. Okay, so these are really going back to what I was showing you. And on that chart, if you recall, and that belongs to this whole big piece. So what's the character of things over here? 501c3 allow you to book that as a donation. So if I am an individual, I put in money in 501c3, as long as I'm not putting in money to buy food or I benefited myself, it is something that I paid to the nonprofit that can go onto my 1040, be deducted as a donation. Okay, and then you also have other type of entities. For example, and there is a private foundation coming in right here under 501c3. And one I immediately thought of is actually Gates Foundation. This is Bill Gates, Melinda Gates Foundation. This is 501c3 too. But the difference is they call them private foundation because they are really privately funded, mainly by the people who operate that nonprofit. And you can think a lot of those ones. And, you know, Clinton has a Clinton Foundation, so that works the same way, is exempted from federal taxes, and they do receive public donation, but most of the money they have is actually their own donation. What does that mean? And that means you can donate. If I have that much money, I set up a foundation, and all of the money I put in the foundation, it will go as a donation. It won't be taxed on me, right? So there are people who does that through their estate planning. And so the money that they have pass on to their children, no, may not, and or too much to pass on. Then they give to a charitable foundation like this one to set up a purpose. Maybe that, you know, if the family had a handicapped child, they are wealthy, and maybe they set up a handicapped child foundation fund only that purpose. So this is where the private foundation comes in. Then I also want to show you that other than the private foundation, and remember that chart we were looking at, I'm going back there again. You have this 501c4. If I can find my mouse right now, right in next to the 501c3, you see that 501c4. That is actually a civil leagues and social welfare organization. And let me pull up my this is the other one on the 3 boxes on the 501c3. There's a private foundation, but it's called a private operating foundation, and they are so basically very much like the public charity. Some people consider private operating foundation as a sort hybrid between the public charity and the private foundation. They are regulated somewhat like a private foundation. Both private foundation and private operating foundation are as heavily scrutinized as other charitable foundation because donors have close ties to the charity. So I just want you to kind of understand the structure of it. Let's go back to our map earlier. So you have this private operating foundation, private foundation. They are these things with a title of private just means the funding are largely coming from the people who runs the nonprofit. Public charity obviously is a public effort to put that charity together. So it is more of a donation of all kinds of sources. Then under public charity, and you can become and in these 3 types, and under this one type supporting organization, you have a different type of supporting organization. You may ask me, oh, what is that? What is a supporting organization? For example, Wells Fargo is a bank, and Wells Fargo has a Wells Fargo Foundation. And under Wells Fargo Foundation, and if they have an entity, a money-making entity, is actually classified as a supporting organization. Maybe it is a bank mechanism, and they're making interest income, but they only give that money to the foundation, so that becomes a supporting organization. I'm just imagining. I don't know whether Wells Fargo has that or not, but it could happen easily. And so let's go back to the type of nonprofit. So this one, what I want to point out to you is that under 501c3, and you should not be, the nonprofit should not get involved with political lobbying, right? But 501c4, these are free. They're freely participating in lobbying effort. So that is probably the main difference between C4 and the C3. And then now, once we kind of have a good understanding, I wouldn't say good, we have some understanding of the nonprofit organization, you know that the biggest section of it is 501c3. But if you are a trade organization, you could be 501c6. And if you are civil welfare generating kind of entity, you can be a C4, but depends on what you are, and you may or may not have right to lobby politically and supporting certain candidates. So you may not be in that position. If you put yourself in that position as a nonprofit, you could lose your status. What do you mean by lose the status? When I say you lose the status means that suddenly your donation is taxable. Do you want your donation come to you for free? No federal taxes, or you want your donation to be taxed with federal taxes? That's the detriment of losing nonprofit status. Okay, so we kind of covered really broadly of what type of nonprofit we have out there under IRS rules. But now let's talk about how to start up one. So here I laid out the steps that you do. And so number one, you need to develop bylaws and a board of directors. So you cannot have a nonprofit and just on your own. So you must have a board of directors and you must develop bylaws. And some people, you know, English is my second language. So when I just arrived Canada, I didn't even understand the word of equity because, back home in China at my time, and it was communist, right? So there's no concept of equity. So I had a hard time to really understand that concept. Same thing. Bylaws are such a legal jargon, and a lot of people don't know what is bylaw, and I have an easy way to explain to you. That is my way. Bylaws is basically the rules that governs your internal affairs. So let's say if you imagine your nonprofit is your little family, and you don't allow your kids to go to sleep over at the other friend's house. You're just a parents are so uptight and you don't like that. They can never sleep over. That's my kids, they never sleep over. And those are the rules you set up internally at your household. That is for organization. If we expand that concept, that's the bylaws. So you kind of need to have that put in place. Then you have your board of directors. That's your number one. Then you incorporate as a nonprofit corporation in the state of choice. That means wherever you are, you may be doing in Iowa, you may be doing Wisconsin and Minnesota, but remember, where you register doesn't matter. And you could become a nationwide nonprofit. That just means you're gonna register in different states. Whenever you expand to one state, you're gonna register in one state. Just like any other business. If you open up a branch in Minnesota, you need to register in Minnesota. Same thing. If you have a nonprofit organization, you're formed in Iowa, but you got a business opportunity to go in Minnesota, then register in Minnesota. Okay, you can register multiple states and becoming a nationwide company. So incorporate as a nonprofit with state. That's really important because you have to make sure that you find a home. It's almost like you give birth to a child, please find a midwife or find a hospital, and don't think born at home without anybody know isn't an idea, right? So it needs to have a home state. So that is what I mean by incorporating as a nonprofit in the state of choice. Then number 3, obtaining tax exemption status from IRS and the state. Some states don't have any additional step to go because when you register with the state, you automatically already choose the nature of the corporation. So there automatically is a nonprofit. You don't need to submit any application. But with the IRS, no, you have to submit something. And I will show you what they are because that is almost like an application to IRS saying that, hello IRS, when I make money, when I got donation, when I have money saved in the bank, please don't charge me federal income tax. So that's an application for it. And the form number is 1023 and 1024. So I will show you and I'll explain that to you. Then the last in the step of starting nonprofit is to completing additional documents relating to the state compliance, annual report requirement, newly instituted IRS compliance policy, and a corporate record keeping practices. So this is more of a housekeeping. If you say that, oh, Ying, I just want to know what are the things for me to start a nonprofit, I say the first 3 you have to go through. And then the last one is really a maintaining that status ongoing. Okay, so to apply for the status, tax exempt status, and this is what I want to show you, and follow me here. And I pull up the IRS application for the exemption. Look, it's 30 pages, folks. It is not an easy, wheezy thing, but this whole documentation, when you go through it, it helps you to clarify what kind of nonprofit you're really working on. And I want to show you this because majority of your application, you need a 1023 because it says under section of 501c3. Under 501c3, remember we had all of these. Under 501c3, we have all of these ones under 501c3. Okay, so most of the application is on 1023. However, there is another one. It's called a 1024. But right here, the IRS says is under section 501A. They didn't say C3. They say 501A. 501A, right here, it tells you, if you have a 501c2, you are here. 501c5, you are here. 501c6, you are here. Remember, this is the one I was talking about with the business league, chambers of commerce, all of that stuff. They're here. So they have a different form. If it is not listed here, you go back to you go back to the 1023. So that's what you need to apply. This one, 22 pages. Okay, and of course, in the early of the section, I showed you that, and you can always come to this organizational reference chart. It's a publication 557, and it's updated by IRS on October 2010. And then here it tells you what form you're going to use to apply. Look at that. They tell you that 501c3 is 1023. All right. So this is so much I want to say about the application. Remember, I have 3 things to cover. We introduced the nonprofit. Then we talked to you how to apply for one, and then what I want to show you is that the filing requirement. That's kind of the maintenance part of it. And remember, when we were talking about how to set up one, the number 4 was more of a housekeeping, is right here. So you want to understand the state filing requirement, and every state is different, okay? And largely the state doesn't do anything different from the federal requirements. So if you are a 501c3, you file 990, or you know that form doesn't even have a state portion of it. So it is really a federal guided organization. You file that. At the state, you just have the what we call the biannual or annual update with the state. Some state charitable nonprofit need to apply for sales and use and property tax exemption separately from the corporate registration. So nonprofit organization at a state, you may have a different benefit. So for example, some state would exempt you from certain other taxes, sales tax, use tax, and property tax. And if you are educational entity, and Iowa exempt your sales tax, okay? If you are 501c3, you're an education entity, and you don't pay sales tax when you buy things. So those are the things you want to find out at the state level. And the majority of state requires the entity to register with the state and to report on the nonprofit fundraising activities. So, you know, those are requirements of each state. To find out what kind of requirement nonprofit has, Secretary of State of each state, the website will list that for you. So the state filing requirement, but most of the states don't have the annual 990 filing requirement, but they would have other filing requirement, and especially the SOS annual filing you have to do, right? In Iowa, it is biannual, but most of the states are annual. Then IRS also have a filing requirement. I summarized here for you, okay? Gross receipts less than 50,000, and you must file a form called a 990-N. And N, known as the e-postcard, that N, and just, I call them none, because you don't file 990, you file e-postcard. So that's why it's called Form 990N. And if you didn't collect more than 50,000, you don't need to file a full-blown 990. You can just do it easy on the e-postcard. But there are some nonprofit, even though they don't have a lot of money, but they ended up have to file 990. Let me give you a couple examples I know. Number one, if the nonprofit was sponsoring foreign worker, if they're sponsoring their the skilled worker from overseas, or they have a visa sponsorship, those organizations, the immigration requires that. It's not IRS requires that. And also, if you are applying for grants, and the grant requirement says that submit your 990 and for us to review whether you qualified for the grant, and at that time, and you probably don't want to tell them that, oh, well, I just did an e-postcard, there's no information on here, and this is my 990N. No, you want to get your number laid out and on the 990, or you have a financial statement that you can present attached with the e-postcard. So basically the funder like to see how you spend the money and whether you have any money. So that is where those exception applies, and people still do 990. And a gross receipt greater than 50,000, and you can file easy or you can file the full form of 990. A lot of organization qualifies for easy, but very few of them would file easy just because they want all the information to be spelled out for their funding requirement elsewhere. And a gross receipt less than 200,000, total asset less than 500,000, same requirement, and you can choose easy or you can choose the full form. But gross receipt, if it is over 200,000, or your total asset is over 500,000. You know that sometimes you didn't get a lot of gross receipt, but someone donated you a building, and that is over, the value of the asset is over 500,000, then you are required to file 990, okay? Private foundation, remember, private foundation, right? Remember that 501c3, you got this public, charity, and private, and the private foundation file a different form. That's not 990, that's 990 PF. So make sure those are the difference. Now, exception to 990 filing requirement. So their organizations don't need to file 990. Organizations that are included in the group return. So for example, a lot of groups with a lot of churches, and they are actually part of a denomination, belongs to a bigger group. That big group already filed a return for them, and so they don't have to file. Governmental entity, governmental organizations don't need to file. I actually really don't have a good example here. I am guessing, like for example, SBDC kind of organization, they are governmental organizations. They're government-supported nonprofit, and those are the ones they don't require to file. And I'm imagining that they're getting government money, they have to be submitting to show government what they're doing. So what's the point to file informational filing on 990, right? Churches, they are integrated ancillaries and conventions and associations of churches. So generally speaking, churches, you don't need to file, but there are churches, they have to file because they're sponsoring pastors from overseas. So those are the churches, you don't have a choice. You not only you need to file, you probably need to file the full-blown 990. Organizations required to file a different return. So those are organizations, for example, if you are a exempted organization, but you receive your exemption half year, and then you probably gonna file a different type of return. And if you lose your exemption status, it's not the end of the world, and you don't lose your name of whatever you are, you just file different kind of tax return, that's all. And here, the due date. So filing nonprofit organization tax return, there is a due date. And remember the original due date, because you don't have to be January to December. So you could end your fiscal years at any month, but knowing that the due date is 15 days of the 5th month. So if your organization ends on December 31st, then your filing due date is May 15, remember? So that is the 5th month's 15th date. That's a due date to IRS. And if you miss this due date by 3 times continuously, so 2018, you missed it. 2019, you missed it. 2020, coronavirus is here, you missed it again. You losing your status automatically. The IRS don't send you a letter goes, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm terminating your status. No, you don't get anything. You just got automatically spent out, and on the IRS website, you will no longer be a nonprofit. And extension can be filed for 6 months. That's why if you are ending on December 31st, your first due date is May 15, your second due date is November 15. Okay, so those are important things to remember. And of course, if you end in November, and then you know it's April 15, it's October 15, right? But don't forget to file that extension. The form to file extension is 8868. So what happened if you if you just didn't file, you lost your status? If charitable nonprofit fail to file 990 3 times in a row, and you will end up to either you have to start filing taxes as an honorary organization. So let's say if your state organization was actually a C Corp, then you file C Corp. And if you're elected to be S Corp, you file S Corp. So you become instead of exempted from taxes at IRS standpoint, you lose that. So you're paying taxes on what you are making, okay? And you, of course, if you lose your status and people who give you money, they cannot deduct it as a donation anymore. So keep in mind it's 3 years in a row. So if you forgot on May 15, 2018, you forgot again on May 15, 2019, then this May 15, you forgot again, and by May 16, you automatically lost your status. So this is kind of where we covered today on 3 things, and introduce you to the nonprofit. It is not just 501c3, it has more other kind of nonprofit. Which one fit you? You can always consult with Community CPA. And then the second thing we want to tell you is about how to get one. And we talked about the 3 steps, the state, and you first need to get your board director together, get your bylaw together, and then you form at the state level, then you apply for exemption at the federal level. And then we talked about to maintain it. To maintain the nonprofit, we talked about how important that is to make sure that you know which form to file. If you're a private foundation, don't bother with 990. Please file 990 PF. But if you have property in your nonprofit, you need to file 990. And so postcard, all these options, right? Then we also talked about what happened if you lose, how would you lose your exemption status? So we talked about 3 years. So keep that in mind, and I hope you're running a successful nonprofit. I'll tell you that in my book, I wrote about people who are running nonprofit. People who started nonprofit, generally speaking, you are the people from the land of heart because you care. And you care so much about what you do. You know that people would benefit from your nonprofit, but you are not focused on the dollars. You didn't really care about yourself, and you didn't even think of how to pay yourself, but you're starting a nonprofit. And those are good souls, and you are the important element of our society. And any way we can do to help you, we stretch ourselves, we help you. But we want to give you this webinar. When people come to us, goes, hey, Ying, what do I do to set up a nonprofit? And I want to direct them to the webinar so that they can learn a little bit more about nonprofit and make a sound decision, know how to keep the nonprofit running properly. And one last comment for nonprofit. If you're getting public funds, if you're getting government funds to your nonprofit, it is becoming even more critical for you to keep a sound bookkeeping, because you don't want to end up with a nonprofit running really well, government come around and telling you that you're spending money incorrectly, you're not accounting here and there, and why are you paying Starbucks coffee, and things like that come up. It's just not very motivational. And we don't want to spend our time defending ourselves. We want to spend our time to elaborate ourselves, elaborate our good deed and a good intention to the society. So I really hope that this webinar gives you some worthwhile knowledge, and I appreciate your time to join webinar at Community CPA. And I see all of you, and I'll tell you that I love you being here, and you are a strong support to Community CPA, and I keep that dear to my heart.